Masechet Yevamot Daf Kof Yod Gimel. We've been discussing distinctions of why the rabbis made an institution of rabbinic marriage for a ketana and for a deaf people. So there is rabbinic marriage for them, but for a katan and shoteh, they did not. There is no concept, not even on a rabbinic level, is their marriage. So we ended up talking about that, and now we're going to continue and talk about a few other the distinctions between katan and minor and deaf people regarding related laws. So we ask, Umay shena ketana de'achla bitruma, umay shena chereshet lo achla bitruma. If a ketana, bat Yisrael, is married to a kohen, she can eat teruma. Even though this marriage is only midrabanan, nevertheless she can't eat teruma. Could be she can only eat teruma midrabanan. But whatever it is, we do recognize the marriage for that purpose. Whereas for a chereshet, a deaf woman who bat Yisrael, who is married to a kohen, she cannot eat teruma, not on any level, even though they do have a rabbinic marriage. What's the difference? Titnan. העיד רבי יוחנן בן גודגדה על החרשת שסייעה אביה שיוסעה בגט, ועל הקטנה בת ישראל שנישאת לכהן שאוכלת בתרומה. Now, how do we even know that this is in fact the law? Well, we know it from the following Mishnah in Masechet Gitin. We quoted the first half already regarding cheresh. It's also in Eduyot. Regarding a deaf woman whose father married her off. So therefore the marriage she's a minor and deaf, but nevertheless her marriage is biblical because her father married her off, and she can receive a get and go free. So we talked about yesterday. And the second thing he said that we didn't mention yesterday is that ketana bat Yisrael, a minor who's bat Yisrael, she cannot eat teruma in her father's house, but if she marries a kohen, she can eat teruma. So you see, it does apply to a ketana. Now that's the end of Rabbi Yochanan's statement. But vilu chereshet lo achla. But it's curious that he started talking about chereshet and then continued talking about ketana. If the law was that a chereshet also married to a bat kohen can eat teruma, then he should have continued with the same case as chereshet, or mentioned both of them. But the fact that he leaves out chereshet in the second law, it means that a chereshet cannot eat teruma. So how come a deaf woman not eat teruma if she's married to a bat kohen? And the answer is Gizera Shema Yachil Cheresh Bechereshet. This is not going to make perfect sense just yet because we're going to revise it. But right now we're understanding it to mean that we have a Gizera, because maybe if they're both deaf, he is deaf and she is deaf, and he's a bat kohen, then she will eat. So now we wonder, well, what's wrong with that? Katan ochel nebelo too. The hareshet is like a katan. What they have in common is that they are don't have full mental capability, and therefore, just like a katan, if a minor wants to go eat nebela, unkosher meat, we don't have to stop them. We don't feed it to them, but we don't have to stop them because they are not liable in the commandments. And chereshet is the same thing. She's not liable. So therefore, if she's going to eat the teruma, okay, so what? Why would you have to make a gezerah about such a case? So that can't be the reason. Rather, modify what we just said. Gezerah shema yachil cheresh bepikachat. We are worried about he. So when she is the deaf person, we don't allow her. And married to a bat kohen, we do not allow her to eat teruma because it may be confused with a case where she is competent and the kohen is deaf. Okay. Wait a second. In that case, why not allow them to eat teruma midrabanan, since they are married midrabanan? We understand the oraita, since their marriage is not the oraita, and she is a pikachat, so she is responsible for mitzvot, and the marriage is not a full marriage, so we can't allow her to eat the oraita teruma, and so we make a gezerah of this case. Which looks like the previous case. Fine. But why not at least allow them to eat teruma midrabanan? And the answer is gezerah dilma te'leochla b'teruma deoraita. Because if you allow them to eat teruma midrabanan, then they're going to come to also eat teruma deoraita, because they're going to get confused between the two. All right, fine. Okay, so that's regarding eating teruma. Next is about a ketubah. Right, you have to pay a ketubah in these cases. Ma'ishena ketana di'it la ketubah, or ma'ishena chereshet delet la ketubah. What's the difference between marriage of a minor, where she does have a right to a ketubah, an obligation that he has to pay her a ketubah, whereas if a man marries a deaf woman, he is not obligated to write a ketubah, to pay a ketubah. The reason is because if we require, as like we usually do, the rabbis say, you can't have any marriage, no one's allowed to get Jewishly married without writing a ketubah first. And they can't remain married if they lose their ketubah. Yes, that's true. But if we require a ketubah for a deaf person, then men would refrain from marrying her at all. It's difficult to marry someone with a disability, and therefore she may not have so many suitors, and then they're going to have to pay also. So you know what, the rabbis make a dispensation. Says, listen, if someone marries the deaf person, he does not have to pay a ketubah, and then people will be more likely to take care of her. Uktana minalan di'itla ketubah. Now, a minor, how do you know that she does have a ketubah? So this reasoning would not apply to a minor, even though a minor, no one wants to be married to a child, also not mentally fully capable. But the point is that the child will grow up, so therefore people will want to marry a minor because the prospect that they will grow up and grow out of their being children. Okay, now how do we know? What's the source that a minor girl does deserve a ketubah? The following three, if a minor girl refuses her husband, she does not get a ketubah, because she's the one that wanted out. The man says, why should I have to pay? I want to remain married. She wanted out. So he doesn't have to pay. Also, if they are related to each other, if they're related to each other directly, like brother and sister, then their marriage is not a marriage at all. So there's no ketubah, there's no get, there's no nothing. Their marriage is not valid. But if it's a secondary relationship that's prohibited only midoraita, like a grandmother, then that marriage is valid on the biblical level, does work, but is prohibited on a rabbinic level, and therefore we force them. They said, you can't live together, you gotta separate, and don't pay the ketubah. No need to pay. And also ailonit, a woman who turns out to be unable to bear children, does not develop normally. Also, this is mekach ta'ut, and he doesn't have to pay the ketubah. So that's what we learned, that these three do not pay ketubah. However, any other woman who leave with a get, if the man divorces her, including a minor, uktana. So, if a man is married to a minor, if she refuses, he doesn't pay ketubah. But if he decides, you know what, I don't like her anymore, I'm going to give her a get. If the man says that, then yes, he can give a get, but then he does have to pay a ketubah. So this is the source where we see in the Mishnah in Baba Metzia that a minor girl does receive a ketubah. Next, and where is the source that a deaf woman does not receive a ketubah? From here, Tanya, cheresh v'shotev shenas'u pikchot, afal pi shenitpakeach hacheresh v'nishtapa hashoteh, and lahem alehem kelum. Dasu lekayaman yesh lahem ketubah. The law of a ketubah applies both ways. If the deaf man doesn't have to pay a ketubah, and someone married to a deaf woman also does not have to pay a ketubah. So here we're focusing on the man, cheresh, a deaf man and a person who's not mentally competent man, and they marry a competent woman. Even if he becomes hearing, he gets his hearing, or the one who is not mentally competent becomes competent, nevertheless, they do not have to pay the ketubah, right? Even if they wrote a ketubah, the ketubah does not apply. If they want to remain married, then yes, then they will have a ketubah from that point forward. But from that point forward means they don't get the ketubah of a bitulah. Bitulah is 200 zuz. Someone who is already previously married only gets 100 zuz. So in this case, he will have to pay ketubah going forward, but only the 100 zuz, not the 200 zuz as if they were already, as if they would he would have to pay if he owed the ketubah to begin with. So there you see that he does not pay a ketubah, a deaf person, deaf man. And the other way around, a competent man who married a deaf woman or a mentally incapacitated woman, afilu katab la me'amane ketubata kayemet mipnei sherasa lizok bin chasav. If he writes, even if he writes 100 maneh, I'm going to give her this money, in that case, it's valid. Because if he wants to harm his own property, in other words, if a man wants to give away property for whatever reason, even though he doesn't have to, so it is valid. And he's a pikeach, so he has a right to decide to give something. But the point is that he's not obligated to. Tama derasa. You see, it's only because he wants to. I feel like I want to give her a payment. Fine, he can. But if he doesn't want to, then she doesn't get it automatically like a normal marriage would. And the reason is, as mentioned before, because then men would refrain from marrying her. So we want to encourage more suitors to come and marry a deaf woman or a woman who is not sane, so that they will have they will be able to be married. Okay, yachi pikachat lecharesh litkan la ketubah timken miman evela min nasbi. Hold on, if that's true, then this should apply the other way around, where a competent woman who's married to a deaf man, maybe we should say he has to pay a ketubah, so that the woman will not refrain from marrying the men, right? If the whole point is that people need a little extra financial incentive in order to marry someone with this kind of disability, so fine. Just like you give a man extra incentive by not having to pay a ketubah if he marries a deaf woman, so the opposite would be, if the man is deaf, then we should make him pay extra, so that will encourage women to want to marry them. And the answer is yoter she'isha rosa lisa, isha rosa lihinnaseh. That more than a man wants to marry, a woman wants to marry. Women want to be married more than when men want to marry. Man is not men also want to get married, but they can stay single, and they could get a job, and they could be okay. And so the man will figure it out, and so he's not as needful, and therefore we care more about making sure that the woman gets married than the man. Okay. If anyone thinks that this statement we just read is in any way insensitive or inaccurate, I would direct you to read any of Jane Austen's novels. This is practically a quote from the opening of Pride and Prejudice. So this definitely was the reality in Talmudic times, and also up until a couple of hundred years ago. All right, next story. Hahu cheresh dava b'shibutei derav Malkiyu. There was a deaf man who lived in the neighborhood of Rav Malkiyu. And introduction to the story is that a deaf person may not be competent enough to arrange his own financial affairs, and therefore the bet din or a surrogate would arrange for them, including spending the deaf person's money on behalf of the deaf person, like if they need to hire an aide or something. So here's the case. And Sebe iteta v'chatab la arba me'azuze menichse. Rab Malkiyu got a woman and arranged a marriage for the deaf man, and Rab Malkiyu wrote on behalf of the deaf husband 400 zuz, which is double a contract for a betula, a lot of money. Rava said, what a great wise sage this Rab Malkiyu is. Why? I mean, at first glance, it looks like he's wasting the deaf man's money. But no. He figured as follows. If the deaf man wanted to hire a maidservant or to attend to him, would he not acquire a maidservant, and would it not be appropriate to spend his money on a maidservant? It would be. And so here he's receiving not only a maidservant, but also a wife, a double good. So therefore she deserves double that. Okay, this maybe is a little insensitive in describing his wife as being including a housekeeper included. But anyway, he did a good deed, so we will remember him for good. Amar Rav Chiya bar Asher Amar Shemuel. Eshet Cheresh and Chayvin Aleha, Asham Talui. Shemuel made the following statement that Eshet Cheresh, if a wife of a deaf person is not faithful, so now since her marriage to the Cheresh is in doubt, you might think that she would have to bring an Asham Talui. Asham Talui is a special kind of sin offering that one brings when he's not sure if he made a sin or not. A sin that if he did it would be Chayav Karet. The classic case that we're going to see in a minute is if there's two pieces of meat and he eats one thinking it's a kosher piece of meat, but then it turns out someone says, wait, there was a non-kosher piece of meat there, and he's not sure which one he ate, the kosher one or the non-kosher one. One's chelev and one's kosher fat. And so since he definitely did an act, but he's not sure if he had the kosher one or non-kosher one, so he can't bring a definite chatat, because maybe he didn't do anything at all. And you can't bring a chatat unless you know that you sinned. So he brings an Asham Talui that will suspend his guilt until such time should he ever figure out which one it actually was. Now, so if this woman married to a deaf man, since are we not sure if he is competent enough to make a marriage or not, we may think that she would have to bring Asham Talui. Shemuel says, no, she does not have to bring an Asham Talui, neither does the man who is with her, because we do not consider the Cheresh's marriage to be a marriage at all. It's not even a doubtful marriage, and therefore there's no biblical violation at all, no Asham Talui. Okay, so that's what Shemuel said, which means according to that, deaf person is really considered not competent. Lema Misaya le Hamisha lo yitromu. We can bring the following Mishnah from Masechet Terumot, the very first Mishnah, to support Shemuel, because it says the following 5 people, they cannot bring Terumah. V'im tarmu and Terumatan Terumah. And if they did it, even b'di'avad, their Terumah is not considered anything. It's just regular food. Velohen Haresh. Here you go, a Haresh, because you have to have a mental capacity in order to separate Terumah. Haresh doesn't have, and therefore his act is worth 0. So you see that this supports Shemuel, who also said here that marriage of a Cheresh is worth 0. Includes also Shoteh, Katan, Torem et sheno shelo. If I go to someone else's field and I take terumah for them without their permission, so that's nothing. Goy shetam Israel, afil b'shut Israel, or a non-Jew that takes terumah from a Jew, even with his permission. No, it has to be done by a Jew, either by the owner or someone with permission of the owner. All these and terumato terumah. So there you go. We have a Mishnah that supports Shemuel, both agreeing that the action of a deaf person is invalid completely. But then we say, wait a second, maybe not. Hu damar kirabi el azar. Maybe Shemuel does think that a act of a deaf person is worth something, and the reason why you don't bring an Asham Talui is a different reason. Maybe because an Asham Talui has another requirement, as we're going to see. So maybe Shemuel agrees with Rabbi Elazar, the Tanya in the following Braita, Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Mishum Rabbi Elazar, Tirumat Cheresh lo teseh lechulin mipnei shehu safek. If a deaf person takes tirumah, you cannot just add it, make it chulin, because it's doubtful. It's not for sure tirumah, because he's a deaf person and doesn't have full capacity, but maybe he does. We're not sure what the status of a deaf person is. He may be competent, he may not be competent. So you see, according to Rabbi Elazar, it's a safek. And so now we say, well, sevira ke Rabbi Elazar, Asham Talui nami lechayev. Wait a second, if Shmuel does agree with Rabbi Elazar, then he should require an Asham Talui, because safek, maybe just like his tirumah is a tirumah, maybe his marriage is a marriage, and if she is not faithful, then the adulterer will have to bring in an Asham Talui. No, but he wouldn't, because Ba'in and Chaticha Mishneh Mishete Chatichot. Maybe Shemuel thinks that you only bring an Asham Talui in a specific case where there are 2 pieces of meat and you eat one, you're just not sure which one you ate. that's a case where there's two options and you don't know which option you took. But if someone did one act, but he's not sure about the definition of the item, which is different here. So when there's two pieces, I know one is for sure kosher, one is for sure not kosher. I just know someone would know which one I ate. Whereas in this case, for sure, there was a marriage with a cheresh. That's true. We're just not sure what is the status of a cheresh. Can he make a marriage or can he not make a marriage? It's not two different people that we're not sure who she married, right? That would be a case of, we've had cases like that where a woman is with a man. She doesn't know which man it was. Right. So here, because it's one item and we're just not sure of the status, therefore no asham talui. So the point is that just because Shemuel says there's no asham talui, we don't know why. It's not necessarily because he thinks the action of a cheresh is worth zero. Maybe Shemuel said there's no asham talui because it's a safek case of one item, definition of one item, and it there's no two people here or two possible actions. Maybe that's the reason. Okay. Hold on. If Shemuel agrees with Rabbi Elazar, who says that the action of a cheresh is in doubt, it's not absolute zero, it could be something. So then if Shemuel follows Rabbi Elazar, then we have a problem because Rabbi Elazar does not require there to be two different options to bring an asham talui. Even if it's a one safek item, Rabbi Elazar requires it. V'hatanya, Rabbi Elazar omer koi shechavin al chelbo asham talui. Rabbi Elazar thinks that someone eats the fat of a koi animal. There's an animal that we're not sure if it's considered a behema or haya, and therefore there are certain sections of fat which would be permitted if it was a chaya, but prohibited if it was a behemah. He eats one of these, this piece. So this is one piece, right? We know which piece he ate, but we're just not sure about that one piece, what his definition is. And yet Rabbi Elazar said he is required to bring in Hashem talui. So if Shemuel agreed with Rabbi Elazar, then yes, he would say that a deaf person has a doubtful status and could be competent, but he would also have to say that he would bring an Hashem talui, because if he follows Rabbi Elazar, then Hashem talui is not limited to the two pieces. Even with one piece, he would be. So according to that, Shemuel would have to bring an Hashem talui, and Shemuel said no Hashem talui, so it can't be that he's following Rabbi Elazar. And the answer is Shemuel sabar ki Rabbi Elazar behada ufalek ala behada. No, it could be that Shemuel agrees with Rabbi Elazar in one statement, which is that a deaf person does have some competence, doubtful, right? He has a 50% chance of being competent. He agrees with Rabbi Elazar on that, but he does not agree with this statement, and he thinks that in order to bring an Hashem talui, you need to have two pieces and not one, and so therefore there is no proof that Shemuel agrees with the Mishnah regarding Terumot, that a deaf person has zero competence. That's all one version of the discussion regarding Shemuel. Here's a second version that's short. This is the opposite. According to this version, Shemuel says that if someone has relations with the wife of a deaf person, he is obligated to bring an asham talui. Now we ask a question, Metibeh, Chamisha lo yitromu. We have a challenge to that. Why should he bring an asham talui? After all, he's married to a deaf person, and we see regarding teruma that the action of a deaf person is worth zero. Right? It has zero capacity. And so there too, his marriage should not be considered anything and should have no repercussions. And the answer, Savalak Rabbi Elazar, maybe he agrees with Rabbi Elazar, who says that a deaf person who takes teruma has doubtful status. And so too, his marriage would have doubtful status, and that would result in the adulterer having to bring, unwitting adulterer, because that's why he brings a korban, he didn't do it on purpose, would bring an asham talui. Good, that's the second version. All right, next question. Ba'ad av Asher. My tamad Rabbi Elazar. Mifshat peshita le techeresh data kelishtahu, umihu mesapeka le I data siluta, ilav data siluta, ulolam hadadatahu, That's all one side. Okay, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Elazar? What kind of doubt is this? Does he say, yeah, for sure that a deaf person has a weaker mind capability, and he's just not sure if he has sufficient clarity of mind or he doesn't have sufficient clarity of mind, but the point is that it's always the same. Right? According to this option, a deaf person is consistent. He always has the same level. And we know it's less than a normal person, but it does have some clarity. Is that clarity past the threshold of being able to enact marriage or tiruma, or is it beneath the capacity? But it's always the same. We're just not sure where it falls. Does it pass the threshold or not? That's all one option, meaning it's consistent. Or maybe Rabbi Elazar knows that a deaf person, most of the time, he has a weakened mental capacity, and it's unclear. It's not clear enough to enact a transaction. But nevertheless, here, the reason why he has a doubt is because sometimes a deaf person may have competence, right? Something that he understands, maybe because, he sees it or understands something. And so maybe sometimes he can understand something, and sometimes he is like an insane person. Again, remember that, this is kind of hinting to the fact that they saw that deaf people sometimes are intelligent. They just didn't know how to communicate and educate them. Okay, so that the question is, according to the Rabbi Elazar, who says that a deaf person's actions have doubtful legal status. What's the doubt? Is it that the deaf person is consistent? We just don't know if that consistent level of imperfect competence is sufficient or not. Or is it that the deaf person is wavers, and sometimes he is very low capacity, for sure less, but sometimes he has high capacity and for sure good. And so it's a different type of doubt. All right, so which one is it? So we ask, well, what's the difference? The difference would be if a deaf person enters into a marriage, could he give a get to exit? If you say it's consistent, then he can give a get, because however he got in, so too he gets out. If he had enough mental capacity to make a good kiddushin, then he'll have enough mental capacity to do a good get. And if not, then not. But either way, it's consistent. But if he's not consistent in his mental capacity, then kiddushin maseh mekadesh, kiddushin maseh lo maseh megaresh. Then it could be that when he made kiddushin, he was good mental capacity, so he has a powerful kiddushin. But when it comes to then gerushin, when he comes to give the get, then he has insufficient mental capacity, and there's no way to tell. So therefore, he cannot give a get. My teko, and the answer is we leave this question standing. All right, next part of the Mishnah says nishtatet. The Mishnah mentioned that a woman who becomes deaf cannot be divorced. He cannot divorce her. And so the question was why. We saw that a woman who is deaf can receive a divorce because divorce can be given against her will. So if she's not sane, and also how come she cannot be given a get? So that's what we're going to explain. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Devar Torah, Shota mitgareshet. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, according to Torah law, a woman who is not mentally competent can be divorced. A man can give her a get. It's the same as a woman who's competent, who does not want to get out of the marriage, and she can be given a get against her will. So since it can be given against her will is not necessary, her mental competence is not necessary. So therefore, why did the rabbis come and say that a man is not permitted to divorce his shota wife, so that other men will not come and abuse her without a husband to protect her? She will be just subject to the whims of other men, and so therefore, to protect her, the rabbis say that a man cannot divorce her. Okay, hechi dameh. Now, what exactly are we talking about? What are the circumstances? If you're talking about a woman who has sufficient mental capacity that she can hold on to her get, give her a get, she knows that this is something important that she will watch, and she also knows how to guard her own self. And if someone tries to abuse her, she will be able to say no. So then, will people treat her as ownerless property? She knows how to maintain boundaries against oncomers. So then people will not mistreat her, so we don't have to worry. Rather, must be she has very low capacity and she does not know how to guard her bill of divorce, and she just she's so incapacitated that she just thinks it's a paper plane and throws it out, and she also does not know how to guard her own body. If so, Devar Torah Shotamit Gareshet, would you say about her that in Doraita law she can be divorced? V'natan biyada מי שיש לה יד לגרש עצמה, היא עשתה זו שאין לה יד לגרש עצמה. We have a statement from the Bianai, Dirasha, that says he has to give the bill of divorce into her hand, which means it's only a valid bill of divorce if she has a hand to receive it. That excludes someone who does not have a hand. We're not talking about having physically a hand, or that itself, or you could get around because you just throw it into her domain or something. But the point is, she has to have capacity to accept it and hold on to it and know that she has received something, and be able to guard it. So if she cannot do that, then the get is nothing. It will be like a man taking a get and just throwing it up into the air. It doesn't serve anything. So that can't be the case, because then the Torah law would not be that they are divorced. So v'tana deber bishmael v'shilacha mibeto mishe mishalecha ve'ena chozeret yasta zo shemishalecha ve'chozeret. A similar law that you can only divorce a woman who, once he divorces her, she will stay away. But a woman who's so mentally incapacitated, she forgets 1 minute later about the divorce and she comes home anyway. She keeps coming home, so then there's no divorce there. She has no embarrassment to come back to where she's not wanted. So similar, such a low-level mental capacity would not be able to divorce even on a biblical level. So that can't be the case either. So rather, rather must be talking about an in-between case where she has enough mental capacity that she can hold on to her get and say, no, this is something important, but she doesn't have enough mental capacity to guard her own body, and therefore she may be abused by others. So from a biblical law, she can hold on to her get, and therefore she can be divorced. But the rabbis came and said, yeah, if you divorce her, she can hold on to the divorce, but then she's going to be wandering the streets and people will abuse her and she won't know to guard herself. And therefore, you married her, and now it's your responsibility to remain married and protect her. אמר אביי, די קדמה, דקתני גבי דידה, נשתתית לא יוסי, גבי דידה לא יוסי עולמית. And Abaye says, you know what, in the Mishnah itself, there's a hint that this is in fact the case, because regarding a woman, if she became incapacitated, the Mishnah just says lo yotzi, he cannot divorce her. It's in a simple language. But regarding him, if the man becomes shoteh, mentally incapacitated, then he cannot give a get, because a man needs da'at, needs mental capacity in order to give a get. But for him it says lo yosi olamit, he can never divorce her. So why does it say never divorce her regarding him? Regarding when she becomes a shotah, it doesn't say forever. What you see is the olamit, the added emphasis is when he becomes a shoteh, then he cannot possibly, even on a doraita level, give a get, because he doesn't have that capacity to make that kind of transaction. And that's true forever, or at least as long as he remains a shoteh. Whereas for her, it uses less strong language because it's only to the Rabbanan. It says, Lo yotzi, don't do it. The rabbis don't want you to do it. Even though midoraita, it is possible to do. So you see that there's a distinction embedded within the language of the Mishnah, hinting to the deoraita, the Rabbanan distinction. Next, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So this relates to the conversation that they had in the Mishnah. Let's remind ourselves of what it was, right? So remember, the law is that a man cannot give a get. A shoteh man cannot give a get, but a shotah woman can receive a get. And that was the opinion of Tanakama. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, why do you make a distinction, right? Why do you say that a woman who became deaf can, same thing with deaf or shota. So rather, let's talk about not shota. Shota, we just said she cannot be divorced to protect her. But back to deaf. A deaf man cannot give a get, but a deaf woman can be forced to receive a get. And Rabbi Yochanan said, how come a woman who became deaf, she does receive a get, but a man does not give a get, right? What's the difference between them? And now we're not sure, Rabbi Yochanan, does he want both of them to be more like the man or more like the woman? We're going to clarify that. But anyway, they told him, oh, no, it's not the same. A man who, ish megaresh l'isha mitgareshet, because because a woman can be forced to be given a get, and therefore she doesn't need mental capacity. Whereas a man, since he has to be willing to give a get, and it cannot be forced upon him, therefore he has to have will, he has to have mental capacity. And so there's a fundamental difference between them. And then the rabbis furthermore bring a proof from Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgoda that since a chereshet, a minor woman whose father marries her off on a biblical level, it says she can receive a get, nevertheless, even though she is a chereshet. Even if she grows up and becomes an adult, she still can receive a get. So you see that even a biblical marriage can be separated through a get, even though she is deaf. So you see that a deaf woman can receive a get. They said, so the rabbi said, the cases are the same as this, right? A woman who was mentally competent and became deaf is the same as a woman who was a minor and deaf, whose father married her off, deoraita, and then grew up and received a get, and that's the proof. Okay, so now we're going to analyze this. What's his question exactly? What's his challenge to the rabbis? Does he agree that a man who is deaf cannot give a get, and he agrees. But he's saying, wait, why? How come a woman should be different? Oh, I think a woman also should not be able to receive a get. Is that he's being stringent on both? Or maybe he agrees that a deaf woman can receive a get. He says, why should there be distinction? If a woman can receive a get, then a deaf man should also be able to give a get, and maybe he wants to be lenient on both accounts. Well, let's analyze from the response that the rabbis give to him what his question was. Ta shema midekamru le eno dome ha'ish hamegaresh leisha hamitgareshet. Since the rabbis formulate their response as, a man who wants to give a get is not the same as a woman who wants to receive a get. Because a woman goes with her will or against her will, and a man cannot be forced to give a get except with his will. So you see that they are assuming that the woman is the correct law. Everyone assumes that yes, she can be forced to receive a get, and the challenge was regarding the man. Right, that's why they answer. The answer focuses on the man. That's what they mentioned first here, and so they answer, no, the man is different. So that means Rabbi Yochanan thought the second one, that Isha, yes, for sure, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri wanted both to be lenient, be able to give a get and receive a get. But then we say, hold on, Adrabah, midekamru le. No, but look at the second response the second proof that the rabbis give after this section, after they quote Rabbi Yochanan ben Goda, And then they say, Af zo kayoseh ba, this woman is also like that. It means that the question that he asked was about the woman. That's why they had to bring a proof. No, see, this woman, she is forced to receive a get. So too, the woman who becomes deaf also is forced. That means in the question period, he assumed that, of course, the man cannot give, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri thought that the woman should be the same and both should be machmir, which is the first option. So now we have a quandary because the two parts of the response of the rabbis assume two different things. So what do we do? Rather, it must be that he formulated a statement to say, according to you, sages. He really wasn't his own opinion, but rather according to them. I think what Rabbi Yochanan himself really thinks is that just like a man cannot give a get, so to a woman cannot receive a get. That's really what he thought. And that would make sense with the final response that the rabbis give when they tell him af zo kayoseh. So that's what he really thought. But the first question here that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri formulates, when he said this question, he was actually saying it according to the rabbis. Ela lididchu, according to your opinion, mai shena isha or mai shena ish. What is the difference between a woman and a man? Why should the woman be able to receive and the man not? Why should we be able to receive and the man not be able to give? And for that, so he says, no, we think the man is different because it has to be according to his will. So that's why they answered in that way, to respond to his challenge, which was according to them. But really, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri himself thought that man and woman, both machmir, a man cannot give, and a woman also cannot receive a get who is deaf. All right, and then we get to the next section of the Mishnah. Ha'id Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgoda, he said that a father who marries off a minor who is deaf makes a deoraita marriage, and even so, she can receive a get. Amar Rava me'eduto ben Gudgoda amar le'edim. So Rava says, based on what his law, I can derive another law. A surprising one. If someone comes and says to witnesses, he's going to divorce his wife, and he tells the witnesses, you need witnesses to divorce a wife, he says, look at this get, I'm going to go give it to my wife. Okay, you're going to be the witnesses. Fine, they agree. But when it comes to his wife, he says, here, take this promissory note. Take this note that I owe you money. She accepts it, and she didn't read it. She thinks that it's a promissory note. She's like, oh, fine. Oh, yeah, you owe me money. Great. I'll accept it. So she doesn't know it's a get, so she accepts it, thinking it's a promissory note. Nevertheless, it's valid. Now, what does this have to do with the other? The point is that even though, just like Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgeda said, that a deaf woman, she is married fully because her father married her off, yet she can receive a get even though she is not has no mental capacity or diminished mental capacity, and yet she can receive a get. So, but you ask her, what is this? She won't be able to tell you. So too, a mentally competent woman who he tricks. And he says, it's clear that the man knows it's a get. He told the Edim that it's a get, so the witnesses know what it is. And he just tricked her. She has no idea what she received. Nevertheless, it can be against her will, even without her knowledge. It is a good get. That's the comparison. Right? See, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudda says we don't need her knowledge, and here, so we don't have her knowledge, but it's still valid. So now the Gemara says, Peshita of Rava, of course it would be. Why would you think not? Now here's why you wouldn't think so. Here's why Rava has a chidush at all. You might think when the husband says, here, take this promissory note, maybe he is actually nullifying the bill of divorce. Maybe in his own mind, he changed his mind. He told the witnesses, here, I'm going to give her a get. When he came to actually give her a get, he got cold feet. He changed his mind. You know what? Maybe I like her. So, but he already has it in his hand. He's giving it to her. So he says, you know what? Consider this a promissory note. And by that, he, in his mind, canceled the get. So you might think that. Kamash malan i'ita debatele le'edim hava kamar lehu. So Rava comes to teach us that if he wanted to cancel, he would cancel. He would have told the witnesses, "Oh, listen, I have this get, but I changed my mind. I'm not going to give it to her." He would have told them. If he didn't, since he didn't tell the edim, in fact, the opposite. He told the edim, "This is a get." So that means he did not cancel it. And why did he tell her that this is a promissory note? It's only because he felt ashamed to tell her in front of her face, "Here, I'm divorcing you, get out of here." And so I said, a promissory note. He wanted to save face. And so that's why I told that, but he really meant it all along, and so we can learn that that is in fact the case. Okay, this adds to another example of using trickery, as we saw before, that sometimes the rabbis will allow someone to say, "Here, do chalitza, and by that you will marry her." And then he does, and chalitza says, "Oh, we just tricked you. Chalitza doesn't make you marry her. Now she's prohibited to you forever." So this would be yet another case of saying one thing and meaning another, and yet it is in fact still valid. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen v'amen.